Welcome back to the table, friends. I am your humble host, GreyDMs, and with me as always is Owen.
Hi there.
Today we come to you
Something different.
a little something different. Yes, thank you, Owen. Off of sorts. Today we have come, or Owen has come specifically, to present a topic that I am going to be a willing recipient. I'm going to be a student to Owen's teacher here.
I was going to say, I hope everyone's willing in this situation. If someone is forcing you to listen to our podcast, I'm sorry.
You should tell them so we can thank you.
Yeah, that's one more viewer.
So without further ado, Owen, I'm going to turn things over to you today.
All right. Well, today I'm going to break the chain a little bit, and I'm gonna go off the track with something. We're still sticking to tabletop RPGs, but we're kind of moving to a different one this time. I'm gonna talk about Shadowrun.
Ooh.
Yeah, so for those of you that haven't heard of Shadowrun, this will probably be a nice little introduction to something that you might want to play. For those of you that are familiar with Shadowrun, I'm sorry for all the mistakes I'm going to, say here, but there it is. Yeah, so Shadowrun, again, it's a tabletop RPG. It's been around for quite some time. It was released in 1989. And so there's some strange things going on here. So in the time period, I mean, what's the popular tabletop RPG at the time?
89, I mean, AD&D is huge.
Yeah. And what does AD&D, involve? Like, what's the setting?
Fantasy tropes, orcs, elves, kicking down doors, dungeons.
So also, I mean, we're talking in the 80s. Culturally, what's really popular?
A lot of different things. I can make a guess.
No, I need you to narrow it down to one. Yeah, go ahead and guess.
The futuristic sci-fi stuff?
Futuristic sci-fi stuff,
gritty,
yes.
street.
Gritty punk, that's all there.
Aesthetic.
Hey, you know what? We'll get into that a little bit. But yeah, 80s is the corporate overlords, running everything, Reaganomics, all that stuff's going on. And yeah, Highlander. Okay, there were some good things. Greatest movie ever made.
First movie ever made.
But yeah, so I mean that's the big overarching feeling. The young people of the time feel like, hey, oppression, like we need to be different, break out of the mold, just do all those things. So, cyberpunk fantasy was just primed for the 1980s. So you've got two guys that decide to make it. One's called Jordan Wiseman. The other one is L. Ross Babcock III. I'm not going to be calling him that through the whole thing. I'm just going to be calling him Ross Babcock or just Mr. Babcock. But these guys, they both grew up in that time period. They're both very interested in gaming, but they're both interested in it from different angles. So we're going to start with Jordan Wiseman. So I was born in the 1960s, Chicago, Illinois. Grew up in the middle of a massive cultural shift from 1960s to 70s, where technological advancement, space exploration, and the growing obsession with science fiction. So early on, fascinated with storytelling, world building. He was creating his own stories. He's creating his own games, drawing maps, rules for imaginary games, science fiction fantasies. I mean, this is all when he's a young kid. But he had, a love for mechanics and engineering. And you can probably guess, time period, grew up, 60s and 70s. Biggest television show, sci-fi television show of the time period, Star Trek.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. 1968, 2001, Space Odyssey.
Ooh.
And then, a lot of board games were coming out at the time, strategy games, things like that. So these are all the things that he's really getting into. But, he wanted to create his own. So he attended Francis W. Parker High School, which still exists, it's still around. It's a progressive, student-driven facility. And they basically encourage the students to think creatively and independently. So This is a great place for a guy with, his particular mind. Once he graduated, he joins the Merchant Marines, which, seems like an odd thing to do for a person with his background, but it was a place that taught him structure, taught him logistics, taught him strategy. It was one of the few places that could teach him how to navigate vast unknown territories, the ocean, but not space. I mean, we're talking the 60s and 70s, even today, you got to be something special to go up into space. But this is also the place where he met Ross Babcock. But Academy wasn't really for Wiseman. He didn't really fit in. He wasn't interested in traditional military careers. He basically stuck around until he met Babcock, and then he transferred to University of Illinois in Chicago. He never finished his degrees. He felt that formal education wasn't teaching him what he wanted. He wanted to focus on games. So let's switch over a little bit, and we're going to talk about Ross Babcock. So he was also in the Merchant Marines when he met Wiseman. Both of them talking about their passion for video games. They just hit it off.
I love when the beeps and the boops go bang.
Yeah. So instead of studying, they spent a lot of time playing war games, role-playing games, and just discussing game design. But they really wanted to do something of their own. They wanted something that was deep and engaging, but most of all, they wanted sci-fi, and they also wanted RPG mechanics built into that. So, that's kind of where they went. And after that, when Wiseman left, they stayed in touch. They kept talking back and forth. And finally, they just realized, let's do it. Let's make a game. So we're going to go into Babcock's education a little bit here. So he was focused on creating worlds and narratives instead of the story. He wanted to develop the world. He was more interested in the structure. He wanted the rules, the strategy, and the mechanics. Like, that's what he was into. Like, he was obsessed with tactical war games, intense planning, logistics, critical thinking. He loved military history and technology, and he was very much a storyteller. Wiseman was a storyteller. Babcock was a logic, rule-driven counterpart. So
I don't understand how these two guys could ever get along at the table. Basically.
Yeah, I know. You have the one guy, it's just like, I want this awesome story. And the guy's like, I just want to kick the door down. How much damage do I do?
Okay, go back to yeah. So the guy kicks the door down. Did he succeed in his strength check? I need to know these details.
How did he, does he have a battle axe, or did he physically kick the door?
You have to get the details from me. No, that's not the point.
But yeah, so unlike Wiseman, Babcock had more of a traditional career path in mind. He wanted to follow the structure of military life. That's why he joined the Merchant Marines. But even though it was disciplined, structured environment, he couldn't ignore his passion for games. And who knows what might have happened in his life, but he bumped into Wiseman, and Wiseman pretty much just sent him on a different trajectory altogether. So when Wiseman left the academy, they stayed close. They kept talking about games, and then they decided, let's start our own company. So 1980 comes around. They're done with it. They're making a game, or they're making their own company, and they do what they can. But two broke college kids, they have to figure out how to, make a gaming company together. So, this is an astronomical amount of money. They both chip in $150.
Oh God! I don't know how their how their bank accounts can afford.
And they make FASA, F-A-S-A.
Jesus,
the FASA Corporation.
So for $300, they made FASA.
Yes.
Wow.
So, Grey and I are thinking about making our own game.
I think I found $150. I'm just saying.
Accounting for inflation, we only need $150,000. So FASA stands for the Fredonian Aeronautics and Space Administration. Does that sound familiar at all? So
not the acronym. The acronym does.
The acronym doesn't. It's Fredonian. So Fredonian, it's play on words of Fredonia, which was an imaginary country that the Marx Brothers created in a movie called Duck Soup.
Oh.
And it was basically, the joke was like, it's, Fredonia, where you have all the freedom in the world, but don't do this, 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 don't do this. Like that's the joke. They made a whole song about it. So they had a couple of, early challenges. They had no office. They were working basically out of apartments and basements. They had no financial backing. They pretty much had to figure out how to create and print and distribute the products that they were making. And they had no reputation. No one knew who these guys were. No one knew what they were doing. So the approach that they decided to take is they started by creating the rules and expansions for an existing game. And that game is called Traveler. So Traveler was created in 1977 by Mark Miller and was published by Games Designers Workshop. It was a hard sci-fi, basically inspired by Robert A. Heinlein and Isaac Asimov, focused on realistic space travel, interstellar politics, and trade. And unlike D&D, characters could die during character creation.
That's its notorious contribution to the field.
So I'm going to go into that a little bit. So we're going to talk about this. So this is from, some information I found. So Traveler introduced a unique character creation process that resembled a life path, where players would roll to determine their character's background, careers, progression, and skills. This system added depth and realism as characters had histories that influenced their abilities and personalities. Notably, the process included the possibility of the character death during creation, emphasizing the game's commitment to realism and risk. So step 1, you roll for basic attributes. And this is strength, dexterity, endurance, intelligence, education, which is formal knowledge and training, and social standing. So social status, which can influence rank and starting wealth. So after rolling each attribute, record the values.
My points at the social. Easy path.
Traveler does not allow re-rolling or adjusting stats. What you roll is what you get. Step 2, you choose a career path. So instead of starting as fresh adventurers, Traveler characters begin as experienced professionals who have already spent years in a career. The available careers are Navy, Marines, Army, Scouts, Merchants, and other, which would be rogues, bureaucrats, and pirates. Once you select a career, you attempt to enlist. So you roll 2d6 against the enlistment target, because some of these are easier to do than others. And if you succeed, then you enlist as that character or that thing. If unsuccessful, you may either choose the draft, rolling randomly to determine a career, or attempt to enlist in another career. So you can literally lock out, a particular career. So step 3, survival roll. Each term, 4 years of service, requires a survival roll, 2d6 against the target number specified to the career. If you fail this roll, your character dies during creation. You must start over. Some careers, like Scout, have higher risks but better skills. If you want to play it safe, choose careers with easier survival rolls. Skill-based mechanics departed from the class system prevalent in early RPGs like Dungeons & Dragons. Traveler employed a skill-based system allowing for more flexible character development. Players could customize their characters by acquiring a wide range of skills, reflecting the diverse challenges they might face in science fiction setting. So there's a lot going on there.
So I don't understand. I still don't understand that decision.
What do you mean?
So, well, because as a gimmick to sell it, sure. Yeah. You're rolling to see if it succeeds. But it's just you're like, okay, so Scout is the riskiest to survive for 4 years, but it offers a lot of skills.
Correct.
So I come to the table with my 9th version of a Scout.
You just keep rolling until you get it. Yeah, well, because the thing is you're like, yeah, I want to make a Scout. Because the early thing is, this is the role I want. I'm going to see if I get it. And if you get it, you get it. If you don't, you have to do the draft or you have to roll for one of the other ones. So you might not even get to make a Scout to begin with. Then you roll to see if you survive or not. So you might just get stuck with something you didn't want to create. But the thing is you can roll something you don't want to create and then end up surviving, and now you have to play that character. Where if you rolled something you wanted to make, and then you rolled and you died, you're like, crap, I have to go back and now make a character I don't want to play.
I guess I get to the point of, and now you have to make that character?
Yeah.
Like, no one's going to do that, right?
Yeah,
like,
no.
But like, okay, I get it. There's a type of person, I believe we've met them before, that would love this.
Yeah, I think they
So
would.
we'll just leave it at that.
I think they would. All right. So, reasons that Wiseman and Babcock chose this: they loved the game. They made detailed ship deck plans, new adventures, and mechanics expansions. And their supplements were a hit. People actually really loved them. They became a top third-party publisher for Traveller. So after this, they decided, well, let's look at some other stuff that we can do. So they started looking at some standalone titles. So by the 1980s, they established themselves as a respected third-party publisher in the RPG space, particularly due to successful Traveller supplements. However, Jordan Wiseman and Ross Babcock weren't content with just adding to other people's games. They wanted to create their own. So this is their big one. They acquired the Star Trek RPG license from 1982 to 1983. So they got this huge step forward for them. So instead of just expanding on Traveller, or similar games like that, they actually got to make their own rules. They're now making a full-fledged RPG. Like this is everything that they want. And, it's one of the most beloved franchises of the time, so people are just, this is huge. So they enlisted some help. It was designed by Guy McLemore, Greg Pohine, and David F. Teepool. And Wiseman and Babcock basically just oversaw the production and the business side of it. So it was released in 1983. It focused on Starfleet officers exploring the galaxy, completing diplomatic missions, and engaging in combat when necessary. It used a percentile D100 system, so it was different from D&D and Traveller. Featured extensive lore, which becomes a problem, and background information, including details on Federation, Klingon, and Romulan ships, organizations, and alien species. Introduced supplements that expanded on ship combat, planetary explanation, and Klingon campaigns. And it was a hit. The fans freaking loved it. It gave a ton of information that fans were just like dying for, because all they had up to that point was, the original series, maybe a couple crappy cartoons, but no one was really saying like, well, why do the Klingons look like guys in blackface paint, stuff like that. So late 1980s, Paramount, the owners of Star Trek at the time, they had a bit of a conflict. They started restricting their licensing requirement, making it more difficult for them to make new material without Paramount giving the okay. So like I want to do this. I want to include Romulans. And they're like, no, we don't like that. That doesn't fit with our vision of it. And by 89, they lost the licensing for it.
Snap.
Yeah. So that was that. So even though, it ended, this was basically the breakthrough moment for them where, they're legitimate. They're making something that's very popular. People really get to know their name. So this next one you might be familiar with. So 1984, they released Battle Droids.
So I was waiting for this line of happening.
So Battle Droids is inspired by Japanese mecha anime, and it was basically focused on giant robots instead of, armies. So the first version of this was called, Battle Droids. It was released in 1984, but there was this somewhat popular movie that came out, a few years earlier that had the word droids copyrighted.
Like with GW's, like Space Marines, there's a copyright.
Yeah.
Marines in space, I own that now.
So this tiny company called Lucasfilms trademarked droid, so they had to change the name. And in 85, they changed it to Battletech. I'm sure most of you are probably pretty familiar with that. And this is a really popular game too. It still exists to this day. A ton of people play it.
Have you ever seen like all the crazy stuff like the early Battletech took from various anime?
Oh yeah,
Like where
yeah.
they just bought schematics that people drew for, and we're just like, oh, this is a thing now.
Yeah,
It's like
absolutely.
the
I mean, why not?
Yeah, like the Macross mech, like
Yep,
is
yep.
in BattleTech, and
Mm-hmm.
it's called like, yeah.
Yep,
It
absolutely.
was so bizarre. Anyway, go ahead.
Like this game was very different in that it used a hex grid system. Yeah, you had customizable units,
Gersh
and
gone in this house. We use straight lines.
yeah. And then resource management was really important because you had to manage ammo, heat, all that stuff. So it was really cool. So people that are not familiar with BattleTech, there is so much lore.
Yeah.
There are so many books. I mean, a shout out to Black Pants Legion. They're on YouTube, they're on Twitter, they're on Twitch. Excuse me. Text Talks, amazing. They just do these deep dives into individual mechs. They're freaking awesome. And Tex has the coolest voice. Mm-hmm. You can listen to him talk all day. And you can watch him play like online matches in BattleTech and stuff like that. It's just really cool. But the information he does individual mechs. He does the clan wars, the inner sphere, the destruction, the eventual, rotting of the Star League, like all that stuff, like hours long, videos are very good, very in depth. And it just, they show a lot of the drawings and illustrations from early on, and you're just like, yeah, that looks like it was made in the 80s. Like it's really cool, but like you can really see it. It's just like somebody else made this, but it's why do these look so different? But no, it's very good. So up to that point, BattleTech became their biggest franchise. Board games, RPG supplements, novels, video games. Mech Warrior was a huge video game. It still is to this day. And you had it on the Nintendo, you had it on the Super Nintendo, Xbox, PC. Like, it's just huge. And, I don't know how true this is, but some people say in the 80s and 90s, it was a rival to 40K in popularity.
Oh, yeah. Like eventually someday we'll talk about pieces of this, but like, I remember, like I said, the kid who probably would have played Vampire, like he was in class trying to tell me about BattleTech. He was in class reading these like giant heavy tomes filled with stuff, talking about getting metal miniatures and stuff and painting them up, and I'm just like, I'm not capable of understanding what you're saying. There's too much, And so like in my head, it wasn't years later when like the separation between like Warhammer and BattleTech like separated, because it was like, oh, they're both like war miniature small.
Yep.
Like, so that, yeah, it was huge.
So huge. This kind of tacks on to what you said. Some of the challenges that they became embroiled in multiple lawsuits related to BattleTech's designs. Harmony Gold, which was the U.S. license keeper of Macross and Robotech, accused them of copying mech designs from Japanese animes. And they basically said, oh, no, we didn't do that, and just like changed the designs just enough to be like their own thing. But
there's a really great video on, it's like this obscure like kids show, and like it got embroiled with FASA in this like 3-part thing. And like they all ripped off each other until they eventually invented another show that was originally supposed to be the BattleTech show. Like it's all mental 80s like boardroom stuff that is just insane.
Not surprised. So yeah, I mean, like I said, they probably one of the biggest catalogs out there when it comes to, just other games, supplements and stuff like that. It's just huge. So a few other games that they did, mid 80s, early 90s, Renegade Legion, 1987, sci-fi strategy game featuring space combat, ground warfare, and battle tanks in a futuristic setting. Never reached BattleTech's level of success, but, there's a lot of people who really liked it. And, they eventually dropped that. Doctor Who role-playing game, 1985, based on the BBC's Doctor Who series. It's one of the first RPGs based on British media. I was about to say something insulting, but I wouldn't do that. Players travel through time and space, solving mysteries and dealing with classic Doctor Who villains. It was really popular in the UK, but surprise, didn't really break out in the US market. Eventually, they lost the license and they just discontinued the game. 1982, they had Behind Enemy Lines, which was a World War II RPG focusing on small combat units and one of the first military RPGs emphasizing realism over fantasy. Didn't really get mainstream success, though. So, late 1980s, FASA was at its peak. Battletech was a bestseller, gained a lot of respect through their Star Trek and Doctor Who games. They have had experience with a lot of world building, world design, market strategy, all that stuff's there. So I wanted to push into something new. So again, like I said, Cyberpunk, 1980s, big. It's on the rise. So movies like Blade Runner, books like Neuromancer, real world fears about corporate power and hacking fueled by a new genre. And at the same time, fantasy games were still really dominant. Dungeons and Dragons leading the industry at the time. So I decided, what if we combine cyberpunk with fantasy? A world where hackers, megacorporations, and cybernetics exist alongside elves, shamans, and dragons. So, they wanted it to feel as deep as Battletech, but, more role play, where Battletech was, a tabletop wargaming. They wanted role play involved in this. So that was the initial idea for Shadowrun. So by the late 80s, they had, built their strong reputation. They had Battletech, they had Star Trek, detailed immersive worlds. So they decided, let's do this. Let's put a team together. Let's make this game. It was a huge risk though, because you don't know how smashing together these two, very disparate, worlds is going to really work. And they had to figure out, how are we going to justify it? So, this is what they did it. So 2011, you had The Awakening. So The Awakening was a lore event that would define the entire game. You basically had creatures from mythology, elves, trollers, orcs, and dragons start appearing.
2011 in the game world.
Yes, sorry.
Okay. Makes more sense. I'm with
Gray's sitting here just like, wait, what?
Yeah, I was trying to parse that. I'm
something?
like, we skipped a huge amount of time here.
No.
Awakening with the elves? Like, was this some kind of event?
No. We're still in the 80s, but we're talking about distant, way in the future, 2011. We'll probably never get there, but
Death of the universe time.
Yes. So humans, they begin to mutate into fantasy races. Some of them discover that they can use real magic. Meanwhile, technology keeps advancing, leading to cybernetic implants, hacking, and the corporate-controlled societies just start growing and taking over everything. So you get this resulting world with a blend of high-tech, corporate dystopia, and ancient mystical forces.
Corporations are so evil that when mashed up with something that has necromancers and dragons and they're like, the corporations still take over.
That's just this whole thing, Can you imagine an urban shaman casting spells inside a Tokyo skyscraper? Or a hacker breaking into a megacorp's virtual fortress while an elf bodyguard defends them with a katana? That's Shadowrun.
I gotta say, I have grown up and spent time in the RPG community and have bounced off this idea continuously.
I know.
Until I saw that movie. It was like Bright.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, oh.
That makes sense.
Oh, some of this starts making sense. I might be able to into this. The pieces of this. I love when they're like, oh man, magic wands are weapons of mass destruction.
Right.
I was like, ooh. Oh.
If you really think about it, a wand of fireballs, you're basically carrying around a bunch of bombs.
It breaks the laws of economies, supply, demand, logistics and stuff. Magic breaks those. So how does that affect?
Right.
Yeah. There's definitely an interesting room there.
So yeah, inspirations for it, like we said before, Neuromancer came out in 1984. William Gibson's novel introduced cybernetic hacking, corporate espionage, and virtual reality. Blade Runner, 1982, grimy, neon-drenched future inspired Shadowrun's urban environment. And you also had a competing RPG. Cyberpunk
Yeah.
2020.
I was about to say, I was like, Cyberpunk has to be coming out around this point.
Yeah, Cyberpunk 2020 came out 1 year before Shadowrun.
Oh,
Yeah.
I would like to sit at the table and hear those nerd battles.
So,
Like,
let's get into this a little bit. So, yes, Cyberpunk came out 1988. Shadowrun first published 1989. I have a chart here comparing them.
Oh.
Okay, so Cyberpunk. So, near future dystopia, heavily inspired by Blade Runner and Neuromancer. Shadowrun, near future cyberpunk mixed with fantasy, elves, dwarves, orcs, magic. Magic, cyberpunk, no magic, just sci-fi. Shadowrun, full magic system, shamans, mages, spirits, astral projections. Metahumans, cyberpunk, everyone's a human. They're just heavily modified with cyberware. Shadowrun, humans, elves, dwarves, orcs, trolls. I mean, so far, Shadowrun's winning. Tone, gritty, corporate dominated world where you survive in the shadows. That's cyberpunk.
So the real world?
Yes. Shadowrun, gritty, but also pulpy with dragons, dragon run corporations and magic tech.
All we need to do is peel back the mask of our CEOs to realize they're dragons all along.
Technology, cyberpunk, cyberware, hacking, AI corporations, espionage. Shadowrun, cyberware, hacking, AI, and spells and spirits and astral combat. Gameplay combat, cyberpunk, combat, hacking, net running, social intrigue. Shadowrun, tactical combat, hacking, decking. That was me doing, air quotes, magic use. Corporations, cyberpunk, Arasaka, Militech, Trauma Team, etc. For Shadowrun, as technology, Eris, macro technology, Renraku, but also Dragon Run Corps.
Fair enough.
And then characters. So Cyberpunk, you have edge runners, solo mercs, nut runners, techies, engineers, that kind of thing. Shadowrun, you have shadow runners, street samurai, deckers, shaman, and riggers. Riggers. That's what I said.
Yeah. Checks out. I think Street Samurai is interesting that's in both.
It kind of is in both of them, yeah. But it's like, it's not, I don't know. Cyberpunk, I don't know if that's a class or just someone they say, oh, are you some kind of street samurai?
Yeah, they throw it out a lot, even though like Shadowrun, it was like, it's a class you can be.
Yeah.
Because I remember like that confused me when I was playing Cyberpunk. The game.
Yeah.
The video game.
So did Shadowrun steal from Cyberpunk? Not exactly. Cyberpunk clearly came first in the tabletop RPG space, but Shadowrun was in development at roughly the same time, 1988 to 1989. However, Cyberpunk, the genre, exists before both games. Yeah. So both were drawn from the same pool of inspiration, Gibson, Sterling, Blade Runner. Shadowrun's key differences is the integration of the fantasy elements. They kind of overlap in the hacking, cyberware, mega corporations, but that's just Cyberpunk. I mean, you can't really do anything that. So Mike Pondsmith, the creator of Cyberpunk 2013, he's openly credited William Gibson, the writer of Neuromancer, as a massive influence. The term cyberpunk itself was coined in 1983 by Bruce Bethke in a short story. Gibson was not a fan of Cyberpunk or Shadowrun. He famously dismissed Shadowrun as a kitchen sink mishmash that didn't fit his idea of cyberpunk, and he felt Cyberpunk 2020 was a bit too derivative of his own work. However, both took concepts in different directions.
Just keep imagining this like cheesy 80s promo where like one kid's running around with like advanced D&D and the other kid's running around with like Cyberpunk, and they smash into each other like, you got D&D in my Cyberpunk. You got Cyberpunk in my D&D. Shadowrun. Now, retailers for your youth.
FASA, call us.
We got this.
All right. So where did I leave off? Yeah. So we talked about the cyberpunk media that, kind of influenced mythology, fantasy, Tolkien's Middle Earth, Native American spiritualism. Those were kind of the magical parts. Again, corporate control, you had mega corporations. I said this before, but you had Ars Macro Technology, powerful weapons manufacturer, the Seder Krupp, which was controlled by a literal dragon. Mm-hmm. Renraku computer systems, AI, cybersecurity, so you got that stuff. But, like Cyberpunk, you guys are probably really familiar with 2077. The corporations don't just own businesses. Like, they own, like, the city.
Yeah.
Like, the police aren't police. It's an army. They own everything. The people living in the city are just, pieces of the machine. They're just cogs on the wheel. So let's go into Cyberpunk a little bit. So unlike, traditional Cyberpunk settings, there's 5 playable metatypes. They have humans, default race, elves, beautiful, intelligent, often corporate elites, orcs, stronger, tougher, but discriminated against, trolls, even stronger, often used as bodyguards or enforcers, and dwarves, resilient and technologically gifted. You had a political system in place, so like I said, orcs, trolls, and dwarves are really discriminated against because they're different. Elves are pretty, so they're not discriminated against. They're kind of the Ventrue of the Shadowrun universe.
Yeah, because elves can look at humans and be like, hey, you're the ugly version of me. You do the work, I'll be on top.
And then humans look at dwarves and go, hey, you're the ugly version of me.
Dwarves like, wait.
So you have some careers. Like I said, you have the street samurai, cybernetically enhanced warriors. Deckers, these are the hackers. They navigate.
Where they got that name? Decker.
They they navigate the digital world of the Matrix.
Really?
Yes. Riggers, they basically are drone and vehicle specialists. Shamans, magic users who draw powers from spirits. And mages are classic spellcasters who wield arcane power. So the Matrix is Shadowrun's answer to the internet. It's a fully immersive digital world, much like modern concept of the metaverse. Blech. Like I said, Deckers, they jack into the Matrix using brain-computer interfaces, and their main focus is to bypass firewalls, fight AI security, and steal corporate secrets.
But amazing if that's the secret cut of the Matrix. Neo, join the elves, orcs. Right. Like, what? What is this?
But yeah, this idea directly inspired by Neuromancer and early computer hacking culture. It did kind of predict cyber warfare, corporate surveillance, all those things, because, it wasn't a really big thing at the time. So kind of, some early predictions there. As far as editions, first edition is 1989, the original game. 1992, second edition, basically improved mechanics, added some more lore. Third edition came out in 98, more tactical combat, expanded on hacking. Fourth edition, 2005, updated for modern era, new wireless Matrix, and went Bluetooth.
That's right, I heard that.
Fifth edition is 2013. Again, enhanced cybernetics, more character balance. Sixth edition came out in 2019.
Oh, shoot.
Streamlined rules for modern audience, I guess. That's basically all the information I have on it. They did have some expansions. Anarchy, Rules Light version, Crossfire, cooperative card game, and Hong Kong Dragonfall, modern RPG video game adaptation. But yeah, so you had a lot of games that were video games that were inspired by it. Deus Ex, again, I've seen a lot of stuff say Cyberpunk 2077, but I think Cyberpunk was more on themselves.
Yeah, they're both inspired by the same thing.
Yes, yes.
They're both heavily implied.
But yeah, as of February 2025, Wiseman and Babcock, they're still out there doing stuff. Let's see. Jordan Wiseman remains a prominent game designer and entrepreneur. He co-founded Harebrained Schemes, game development student over titles like Shadowrun Returns and Battletech. In recent years, he's participated in interviews for podcasts, discusses his experience and insights into game design. He appeared on the Bin Press podcast, where he, along with co-founder Mitch Gittleman, delved into their journey in the gaming industry and lessons learned from their projects. He's also been featured in interviews discovering the history and development of Battletech franchise. The channel 6 Sides of Gaming did an interview with him called Battletech 24-Hour-a-thon Part 11 interview with Jordan Wiseman, and he shares some anecdotes and insights from his extensive career. Elros Babcock III, he's still deeply involved with the venture game industry. He manages, designs, and develops new projects for FASA Games Inc., company he helped reactivate in 2012. Under his leadership, FASA Games has produced titles such as Earth Dawn, 1879, and Demon World. And 2022, they introduced Interceptor, a space fighter combat game, with Babcock playing a significant role in its design and production. Looking ahead, he's working on Leviathan, a capital ship combat game set to expand in the Interceptor universe. He also was interviewed by Six Sides of Gaming and their BattleTech 24-Hour-a-thon Part 12 interview with Ross Babcock, where he discusses the origins and development of the BattleTech franchise. Both have been featured in discussions about the history of BattleTech Center and virtual worlds, providing insights into the early days of virtual reality gaming and their roles in pioneering immersive gaming experiences. And through their ongoing projects and shared experiences, they continue to shape the gaming landscape and inspiring new generations of game designers and enthusiasts. Yeah, I just took a lot of that part from Wikipedia.
Yeah, it's a good closing. We want to be PR for them, and I'll go look at their stuff.
I appreciate everything they've done. I've enjoyed several of their products.
Yeah, like it feels very much like, let's be honest, like a lot of, so you have stuff like Tolkien, who like was so ahead of his time that when he put all the effort in, he made like a masterpiece that got built up. That's not how most stuff happens. Most stuff stumbles over and over until it gets to the point where it's been running for so long and also these great talents have gotten together that it is something great. That's what like BattleTech, I think, is like, it got to the point where it was solid lore and it was ready to be built upon, and people just ran and ran and ran, and it just got bigger and bigger. And that's always cool, because that's like kind of like, it's got that SCP vibe where it's like, it feels like because all these people got involved with it, it like grew almost organically. And that's always fascinating.
Yeah.
Shadowrun's like I said, it's like the ugly class. And then one day you're like, I go out with them, maybe, like maybe. She's a type.
She's a type,
like
there's something there.
I might be into it, Like I said, I think that Bright movie was a really cool idea.
Yeah.
The last season there was that anime Demon Lore in 2099.
Yeah. Yep.
And it was like the same thing where like the premise is just fantasy Tokyo gets smashed together, right?
Yeah.
What does that look like?
You have fantasy creatures, you have magic, but you also have crazy technology.
Yeah, and so you get this kind of like, what if the people running the corporations had access to things like immortality, or like, that drastically changes things, So like it is very interesting. I think a lot of people, me included, would have a tendency to go cyberpunk because it's like, it feels like you're more hard sci-fi.
Yeah.
But like, I think there's a lot of character in Shadowrun. And I think like I'm probably just deluding myself into thinking that it wouldn't be super fun and super amazing to just, be some street samurai orc running around talking about
that would be badass.
The man putting him down, and those damn long knife ears sitting up in the corporate towers,
Yep.
that could be pretty cool.
All right, future Shadowrun game confirmed.
Yeah, and hey, you guys, if you've had experiences with these games and you have stories to tell, please tell them to us. We want to hear about this stuff. We want to.
It's the best part of reading comments is seeing people's experiences.
Yeah, and passing the directions on to other people. What's good and what's not. Okay, so is that all you got today, Owen?
That's all I got today.
Well, in our ongoing attempt to keep some padding time at the end of these episodes, but not really, this ongoing topic that we introduced last time, we want to talk about taking a stab at certain classes or certain clans in World of Darkness and trying to see if we could kind of like talk out how one might build a character that avoids the typical pitfalls and cliche. So I have an idea. I think you probably know, but what it is, but like, let's see when it becomes obvious.
Okay.
So I'm going to describe a situation where you might meet this character, and I think this character would be something very fun to play. So imagine if you're a fresh lick, you're a young kindred, you're out in the prowl, you're probably in Anarch territory, and you hear that someone runs or, like runs a club, something like some sort of like, maybe it's a nightclub. Maybe it's, some kind of a trendy place in a town that really hasn't been taken over by the ivory tower.
Yeah.
And maybe it has, who knows? And you decide to go kind of meet the local, the local big names. And you have an encounter with a person who is just an immaculate person. So we're talking about like a physically statuesque, like perfect cheekbones, like perfect skin color, eyes, hair, like, exactly the way this Hollywood wants this person to look, sitting in immaculately dressed in this club, owning this place. And you're starting to go through your head and you're like, clearly, this is what, like, maybe this is, not a Toreador.
Right.
This is a beautiful person. Maybe he's a venture. Maybe this is just an example. And you're having a conversation with this person. The person is eloquent. The person is inviting. They accept you into the club. They lay down their expectations, but they offer their hospitality to you. And they go through and they say, hey, you're here. I'm taking care of you. This is what I expect, and this is what is expected of you while you're here, right? And you're spending time, and you're thinking like this. You have never seen a more like noble / never seen more put together, like a person who has just walked out of GQ magazine and just hit with everything. And then you start realizing that they're a little bit too perfect. That cheekbone's a little bit too angular, and chins, a little too sharp, and that this person is perfect. It's more perfect than nature can make.
So it's hitting that uncanny valley.
Yeah, and there's no aura of like attraction. This person has just refined themselves to be the pinnacle of something, and they treat this place like it is their domain. They have offered you their hospitality. You come in, they put their expectations, but you get the chilling sense that once you have breached or outlasted your stay here, that you're food for them.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, this socialite who you thought could have been an ex-ivory tower, you start to think that they may be someone, maybe from the foreign lands, maybe from, the far lands of Western Europe, and that this is their domain and they are the lord of it. So this is kind of a nice take, an interesting take of Tzimisce, right? So you're talking about, like, if you go to the core, like the core of Tzimisce is this pursuit of evolution and perfection, but it doesn't say what that has to be.
No, it's always the eyes of the beholder.
Yeah, so we like to think of them making themselves like dragons and all this other stuff, but what if they were literally just trying to push past the limits of humanity to be the next evolution of human? Like to be the next perfect being? They were trying to perfect all the things, like find the perfect ratios, find the perfect performance, enhance the muscles, like they're just constantly improving. I think it's very like Patrick Bateman, kind of like, I am this engine. Like every day I hone myself. Every day I fixate to make sure that cheekbones percentage is held. Like I am. Everything about me is weaponized, whether it's to your eyes, your response, my voice. And then you have the flip side of that, which is, or the accompanying side of that, which is the other part of their culture, is this constant like sense of like nobility and this constant sense of lordship and mastery of your domain.
Yeah.
So we read back that like the big thing with the Tzimisce was basically their sense of etiquette, their sense of like hospitality when you come on their domain, that they would give you the best room because that is what to be expected. And they were the pinnacle of a lord, a pinnacle of a ruler. But there's also the flip side, because that means they're also like utterly unquestionable as a ruler in their domain, And so what happens when you've stumbled into one of these people? And like I said, you could sit down at the table with a character like that, and no one would know that that is your client.
Right.
Like everybody's going to be thrown out like, oh, it's going to be like a venture, right? He's going to go talk to a bunch of mucks and, in nice, finely cut suits and discuss these things. And then you only hear is just like, no. I am but a vassal in a greater lord's territory. And you start understanding, like, something's
we're fucked.
weird here. This is interesting, right?
Mm.
So that was like an attempt of mine at like kind of looking at a subversion, right? Like the important part, like I said, is that character in concept for us, we would understand why they were chosen and what connects them to the Tzimisce like core tenets, right?
Mm-hmm.
We know that they're going to have this connection to the earth, specifically their earth, their place, their rulership. They're going to have this connection to hospitality. It has to like affect their kind of ownership of the domain they're in, whatever that is, whether it's running a club or it's some nameless murders and acquisition. So, where people are like flipping each other like their business cards.
Right.
Like it's coming into like, understanding that sense of mastery. Like I think of American Psycho is such a good example of this, where it's like I have reservations even if we're not going to go there, because I am the one who always has reservations.
Right.
Or and where a breach of that etiquette is so horrifyingly detrimental, he might kill somebody. Because he's just like it's just really like just that kind of that uncanny valley pushing past this totality of control over this person, like just
more of a dirty blonde.
Yeah, just like really, I have tapes. I have to read tapes. It's a good twisted movie.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so like I said, your goal should always be to understand why your character is the clan, and it all makes sense to you and probably the storyteller because you've talked to them.
Mm-hmm.
But when they show up,
yeah,
furthest away, what do you mean? That's not creepy. He's beautiful. He's perfect. He's athletic and charming and all these things. And it's really weird how beautiful he is. And have you ever seen his cheekbone?
Is his head a different shape than it was yesterday?
I swear, like we went and we were commenting that like Hollywood, they're like moving towards a more reddish brown hair. And now I swear that was what your hair was all along.
Yeah, it's crazy.
I am the perfect example of my kind. So yeah, what do you think? You think that's pretty good?
Yeah, I think that's pretty good.
Well, I appreciate the feedback from my humble offerings. It's small. I don't know. I'm reaching the end of this one. I got BattleTech on the mind, so I'm fine.
Yeah.
So maybe I'm going to have to go look some stuff up when this is over.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I guess with that, we will close out this episode. And got anything you want to add, Owen?
No, I don't.
Big stoppy BattleTech?
Yeah.